Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are setting up an absolute comic book-style showdown. In one corner, we've got the ultimate force for strategic organizational impact, championed by Barnard, who you might know better as the goddess of the Project Management Office, or PMO. And in the opposite corner, well, that would be the terrifying, completely unpredictable forces of chaos that are currently plaguing project management offices pretty much everywhere. If you've ever felt like you're fighting an entirely losing battle at work just to get a single project across the finish line, you are absolutely going to love this.
Okay, let's dive into this superhero agenda we've got lined up. We'll be covering 5 epic showdowns. First, the template post office. Second, taming Lord's silo stomp. Third, the worth it factor. Fourth, an AI versus Fred showdown. And finally, number 5, the staggering flow miracle. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The template post office. So meanwhile, at the template post office, this is the grim status quo for so many overloaded organizations, right? Our project management heroes are literally just surviving. They're totally buried under, 45 different templates, rigid 82-step processes, and just impossible demands coming from every single direction. It's a pretty dark time. It actually reminds me of a terrible dad joke. Why did the PMO cross the portfolio? To deliver a template no one asked for. Zap! But seriously, this is where a ton of teams live, completely stuck in survival mode, pushing paper instead of actually driving value. And when you're stuck in that survival mode, the chaos manifests in some very specific symptoms. The source material outlines them clearly. You've got way too many priorities, political decision-making, unclear funding choices, overloaded teams, and this just massive disconnect between your strategy and your execution. And the root cause of all this? Treating absolutely everything as a #1 priority. Plus, you've got this constant, raging conflict between the folks just trying to keep the lights on with daily operations and the project managers trying to push new initiatives forward. It's basically an environment practically begging for a villain to swoop in and take over.
Section 2. Taming Lord's silo stomp.
Now, what's really interesting about this concept is the villain itself. Enter the squeaky wheel monster splashing mud across the entire organization, the hippo. For those who don't know, hippo stands for the highest paid person's opinion. The source describes this creature as the executive who stomps their feet, bangs their hands on the desk, and just creates absolute chaos. They scream the loudest for their pet projects, completely disregarding actual business value or team capacity. And what usually happens? Well, the hippo gets exactly what it wants, wallowing happily in the mud, while the rest of the entire portfolio gets derailed by their arbitrary demands.
So how in the world does the goddess of PMO defeat a beast like this? With the superpower of AHP, or the Analytic Hierarchy Process. Because instead of letting the loudest voice win, AHP forces these executives into structured teamwork. Here's exactly how our hero uses it. You have the executives blindly vote on criteria in a super simple A versus B matchup. So, is patient safety more important than cutting costs? Yes or no? And because everyone is voting independently on their own devices, the fear of contradicting the boss completely disappears. Those toxic squeaky wheel politics are totally neutralized. You're forcing the team to make real strategic trade-offs together, stopping the hippo right in its tracks. Pow!
Moving on to Section 3. The worth it factor.
So the crucial point here is a philosophy championed by Barnard. She argues that project managers shouldn't just be asking if projects are on time and on budget. Why? Well, because you can deliver a project perfectly on time, but if it's the wrong project, it literally doesn't matter. You definitely don't need a massive room full of PMP-certified professionals and perfect templates if you aren't doing the right work in the right order to actually achieve real business outcomes.
Which brings us to a really critical question to challenge your own thinking right now. Is your project actually worth it? You have to measure the return on your project investments minus the costs. It's not just about the shiny benefits. It's about the benefits relative to what you actually had to sacrifice in time, energy, money, and focus just to achieve them.
To put that into perspective, let's look at this $1 million example straight from the source. Imagine you have a project that generates $1 million in revenue. Sounds awesome, right? But what if that project cost you exactly $1 million to execute? You spend $1 million to make $1 million. That is definitely not a heroic act. In fact, it's a pretty terrible decision when you realize you could have taken that exact same $1 million investment, put it toward a different project, and generated a $10 million return. You've got to evaluate this worth it factor before you ever fire the starting gun. Speaking of starting guns, let's get into Section 4, the AI versus Fred showdown.
You're gonna love this.
This is a hilarious, real-world story from the source material about a guy named Fred, who is a project manager in Dubai. So, Fred was asked how long it would take him to manually map out a roadmap and balance all the resources for a portfolio of about 70 projects. Fred thinks about it and says it would take him about a day and a half just to get a rough draft that kind of worked. But literally, while Fred was talking, his colleague pressed a button on an AI software tool. Before you can even say bam, in exactly 2 seconds, the AI supercomputer had completely mapped and optimized the entire portfolio.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer power of modern optimization technology. In those 2 tiny seconds, the AI ran a mind-blowing 37,000 different iterations. It evaluated every single possible combination to front-load the absolute maximum amount of value. And it did all that while carefully navigating the resource choke points so no single team member got overloaded. And honestly, the best part, when reality inevitably changes, like say a key resource leaves the company or a project's scope balloons, you don't need to burn another day and a half of Fred's time. You just click the button again for a brand new, perfectly balanced roadmap.
And finally, Section 5, the staggering flow miracle.
Let's move to and see how this builds into an operating model that actually works in the real world. We've got our 3 heroic steps here. First, you prioritize value using that AHP method to finally defeat the hippos. Second, you map your actual capacity. We really need to stop pretending we have a resource problem when what we actually have is an overload problem. You simply cannot shove 10 pounds of projects into a 5-pound bag. But let's be honest, that's exactly what most organizations try to do. And third, you front-load and stagger the work. This means you stop this crazy race to start everything all at once on January 1st. Instead, you only start the work when the right people are actually available to do it. Because when you stop overloading your subject matter experts, when you stop assigning them to 45 different projects where they can only give a tiny fraction of their attention to each one, a literal miracle happens. By properly staggering and prioritizing the work, the source notes you can achieve a massive 84% improvement in project flow. 84%! I mean, that is huge. That means significantly less burnout for your team and much faster delivery for the business. Kapow!
Which brings us to the ultimate question for you to ponder today. Are you going to allow your organization to remain a template post office, just constantly buried in paperwork, fighting off hippos, and stuck in endless survival mode? Or will you use these superpowers we talked about today, the structured alignment, the worth it factor, and staggered resource flow, to rise up as a true strategic impact engine? The battle for value is yours to win. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.